Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Really appreciate that. Sorry, these things always, something always comes up on these things, so appreciate your patience. Just waiting for Brendan to come in here, but I'll go ahead and get us started off. So, as I said, this is our first virtual town hall. The goal here is to kind of bring topics and subjects to light that we think are going to be valuable to the business development community. And we kind of want to bring everyone together kind of in one open forum. This month, we are going to cover the deal origination benchmark report, kind of our annual report that just came out. Many of you may have seen it and had some conversations actually with myself or someone else from the team. And to that end, I actually do want to go ahead and introduce my colleague, Brendan Gobel. He is our head of data insights here at Sudden Place Strategies. He's also the author of the Dober Report. And so I kind of want to turn the stage over to him. Brendan, can you hear me and see me all right?
I can, loud and clear. Sincerely hope you can hear me too. How are we doing?
Doing well.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for that, Rich, and everyone else, appreciate your patience as well. I'd like to say we could blame this on work from home, but I think we can just blame it on Livestorm. Regardless, we're both in. We're excited to be talking to you guys. Certainly excited for some questions to hear what you're all thinking about. Already received a couple, so we'll get into those after that. But just wanted to really jump right into the Dober with you guys. We don't want this to end up to be a full hour thing. Everyone is very, very busy. So first, just the background of it. Why did we start it? How long ago? Why do we think it matters? Back in 2012, I think Nadeem had done the first round of this, and it was really to add some context around an individual firm's market coverage, because otherwise it's a little jarring to see 20% when you think you're covering the entire market. But in context of what your peers are doing, that might be the median, or it could even be top quartile, depending on the peer group that you happen to be in. And for the first couple of years, it was really focused more along the lines of what has happened, how does that compare, and top performers would usually include the results in fundraising materials when talking to LPs. But maybe starting back in 2016, and especially since, we've reoriented the backward-looking perspective to identify areas and processes involved with sourcing that would benefit most from improvement that can then be reevaluated in the following year's Dober. So we have some clients with us now that have gotten a Dober maybe 6, 7, maybe even 8 years in a row. And that's where we've really been able to drive, I think, a ton of improvement. Moving on to the summary market coverage charts. Couple different things that we added back in, I think 17 was the first time. And that's, like I said, when we reoriented this perspective, we added 3 different coverage charts along with stats around market coverage by sell-side process. And then even some stats around just macro, adding some more context, things that aren't really performance-based. So we wanted to make sure that people understand that we're not trying to suggest that they are. And to help you see just how much it's changed, I thought it might be useful just to do a quick share of some of our historical Dober reports. And you can see just how far we've come. And hopefully this is coming through clearly. Rich, let me know if it's not.
I see it clearly, my friend.
Excellent, excellent. So this is an example, a sample back from 2016. Pretty straightforward. Just a single page of this. 17 was the first one where we really started building out some of these other stats, as I mentioned, along with some of these market coverage charts. And it just gets more and more crowded from there. 18, some high-level stats up there, just giving you an idea of what's really being analyzed. And then 19, probably the most crowded it's become. And then now 2020, trying to get a little bit more space, splitting things between a couple different slides, just to further delineate between the performance-based sourcing stats and then the general macro metrics and things like that. And I'm just going to pause the screen share for a second here. Disable screen sharing. In terms of the methodology, and I assume we might have some more questions on this, so I'm not going to bore everybody with all the technical details, but it's always on a trailing 12-month period, LTM, of deals based on the close date through the end of June 30th. And our peer groups that we now have 8 are categories are split up based on how sector focused your target is. So if you're a generalist firm that's looking at pretty much anything, 70% or more of the market, that's the category we're going to put you in. If you're a firm that looks at a third or less, say healthcare fund or tech focused fund, we're going to put you in our sector focus groups. If you're somewhere in the middle, we're going to put you in our quasi generalist. Not the most creative names. We fully accept that. The other component would be the deal size ranges that you're looking to invest in. And a lot of it comes down to whether or not you include our bottom EV range at 10 to 49. It's just such a fragmented space, and firms that only invest there automatically just in our lower market group. If you're a firm that includes that and some other ones, you could be in our middle market group or even lower middle. And then if you only look at deals above 250, you're just in our upper market group. So between those different types of cutoffs, that's how we're coming up with 8 separate peer groups, which are typically the most relevant stats to compare your own firm's performance against. We give you the all sponsor stats so you can see what the market's doing, but it's really the peer group where you're going to see the most apples to apples for comparison's sake. And then last part here, before we can open it up to some questions and hear some of your feedback, your thoughts, just in terms of some of the key takeaways that we thought might be worth sharing at a high level. The best-in-class firms across all 8 of our peer groups have at least one dedicated BD professional, every single one of them. And then of all the top quartile firms across all peer groups, 85% of them have at least one dedicated BD professional. And then in general, of our client base, specifically the part that sponsors, a little over 60% seem to have one. And we've noticed that COVID, while it's been incredibly disruptive across the board, as far as how it's impacted the Dober stats, it's really only been in Q2, and there are 4 quarters in this report. So it's impacting it, but it seems to be more extreme for our sector focused clients. Just they have a smaller sample size of closed deals and could have an increased chance of disproportionate exposure to COVID, depending on which industries they're already specializing in. So maybe they're not hit as badly, or it's been 0 deal activity for 4 or 5 months straight. And in general, even with all the COVID stuff, people are getting deals done. One of the things we had added to this year's Dober, which we might go into a little bit more, is the closed deal stats for each client and their peer group. Because if we're always talking about sourcing, what are you covering? We should also get to that endpoint of, well, how has that resulted in deals that you've invested in? And also, I would say, the clients who get the most out of the Dober, who are using it most effectively, are not just the top performers who roll it into LP presentations, although we certainly appreciate that use case and we would highly recommend it. It's those that are really looking at it for the sake of continuous improvement. There's always more we can do. There's always something else to focus on. But with how conflicted everyone's attention is these days, you only need to pick 1 or 2 areas and even 1 or 2 specific line items on that report to try to drive some change. We'll help you figure out some next steps and action items. And then a year from now, we reevaluate and pick another area to focus on. Rich, I feel like I've been talking more than enough, so let's maybe take a pause there, see if there's anything else you wanted to add or redirect, and maybe get to some questions.
No, absolutely. Appreciate that, Brendan. So as I typed in the chat window, if anyone has any questions, unfortunately, we can't just hand out connectivity for you to come on screen, but there is a questions tab in the upper right of your Livestorm window. And so you can go ahead and type in any questions there. It should be set to confidential, so you don't have to have your name out there if you don't want, if you're the shy type, though that doesn't really affect this group so much. That said, we do have a few questions that came up during the registration process. So Brendan, if you're ready, we can definitely start with those and see if those inspire any follow-ups from the rest of the group here.
Absolutely, Rich. I am just trying to pull those up.
I got them for you if you'd like them.
Yeah, would you mind?
Absolutely, not at all. I think one of the questions we had, I think this has definitely been top of mind and has come up in my conversations with clients, I'm sure it has in yours as well, is how are people sourcing without the benefit of conferences?
Oh, yes. Definitely need to get a little bit more creative and outside the box. The easy answer is that ACG and a lot of these other networks are still doing a lot more virtual events. So instead of going to a conference for 2 or 3 days and you have 200, 300, 400 people on a list, we're doing virtual networking sessions with anywhere from 40 to 60 perhaps, and they only go a couple hours. So it seems as though you are able to still get a decent amount of exposure and interaction with a fraction of the investment of time and stress and fatigue that comes with constantly traveling once or even twice a week, which a lot of people were doing during conference season. Halfway through January through the end of April, even into May, people just constantly flying. Also, it's just extreme drop off in deal flow from April, May, and June meant that people were typically busy sourcing and traveling, didn't have much to source. So a lot of it was digging into pipeline data, your internal logs, which is very valuable information. It's one of the most proprietary parts of the secret sauce that each firm has. Looking for deals that had maybe gotten hung up, or maybe they'd been brought to market in Q4 of 19 or even earlier and hadn't gotten done yet. It's an opportunity to circle back. And while they might have been marketed to some other firms besides yours, a lot of those firms are too busy doing other things. They're putting out fires in their portfolio companies. And by you reaching out, you can maybe get to the top of that list. The other one would be looking for active portfolio companies at other sponsors, and not just the larger traditional funds. It could be an independent sponsor, family offices, those that utilize evergreen capital, something that's been on the balance sheet for 4, 5, or even 6 years. Just an opportunity to source deals outside of the traditional advisor channel, just like going through your pipeline or even trying to reach out to some former targets directly.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff we've provided people over the years, but definitely came front and center, right? As the drinking from the fire hose or drinking from the in Q2 for sure. Perfect. Next question that came in, just best practices for staying top of mind with bankers and intermediaries, especially in light of the travel restrictions, kind of continuing on there, what can people expect, right? To kind of just stay up there and just make sure they get the deals that do come through.
So it's definitely tricky. Everyone knows it, but I feel like it's not acknowledged enough because sometimes it comes off as, okay, get a list of advisors, call them, and you'll magically get all the relevant deals you could possibly imagine, and they'll all be investable opportunities. If only it were that easy. I think it comes down to really tiering out firms depending on your strategy and how sector focused you are, but also the size of the firm. So if you're a sector focused fund and you're reaching out to advisors that only do deals within your target, that's one thing, versus if you're reaching out to some of the larger ones where they have different teams for every imaginable industry, you really need to build multiple relationships, sometimes even on the same industry team or with each industry team that could be sending you flow that could be potentially relevant to you as a firm. So it's kind of a one to many, in that you as the sponsor is the one, and the many is not just multiple advisory firms, it's multiple people within each firm, depending on how big they are. Especially those with sponsor coverage people, it's really tends to be more of a culture thing, depending on the advisor, as some of those, these individuals truly are the gatekeepers. They know every single deal that's being marketed and the buyer's list involved. At other ones, they're less involved, not necessarily sidelined, but it's really the industry bankers and the regional offices that you need to go to. So even if you can't travel, what we've been seeing some success with is just target all industrial bankers in Chicago, if that's part of your target. And the subtext is, we were going to be going to your city anyways for 2 or 3 days. So we're trying to pack as many calls in as possible for these 1 or 2 weeks. And everyone's trying to do different things to get creative. You got to be persistent as well. Multiple touch points, especially if you're building a new relationship from scratch with a person or a firm. It's not just a one and done email or a 2. It's probably 5 or more, especially if you're layering them in with some constant contact or MailChimp blasts, where you're certainly want to advertise yourself as a sponsor with cash to invest, but also what other deals have you guys already invested that are related to what that advisor or professional covers, so they're more inclined to think of you when they're putting together the next buyer's list. It's certainly not easy. So
comprehensive for sure. Perfect. And I got a couple more here, actually. So a good amount of questions coming in. This one is an interesting one in terms of breaking down times in terms of sourcing, right? Off-market opportunities versus banker mediated deals. right? How should a sponsor be looking to kind of split their time and really kind of in terms of the risk reward and in terms of the ROI there?
Tricky. Good question. Everybody wants to source more deals that are proprietary and don't involve an advisor. But I think the overwhelming majority of deals getting done that are a sponsor platform always have an advisor, so that tells a lot right there. We have seen, I think it's maybe around low 60% of deals with a sponsor buyer are coming from private company ownership. And at least with those, you do have a better chance of not always having an advisor involved, but those still are going to be much more concentrated towards the bottom end of the market. So if you're trying to buy off market opportunities and really go around the sell side advisors entirely, buy side retained search firms, those are used quite often. A lot of people try to do direct dialing, but the companies you're calling have probably already gotten 3 or 4 phone calls by 8:30 a.m. every single day, because you're going up against these larger firms, larger funds that hire 10 people out of college, and they just dial phones all day, every single day. So if you're going to be trying to source direct, you really need to be able to have a message that sets you guys apart based on the other investments you made, something about your firm's culture, whether you're operationally focused or you try to keep family businesses together, things like that. So outside of even just figuring out who to call, you need to have a message that's compelling enough for them to want to act on it. Plus, you also probably need some additional resources to handle the extra heavy lifting that's involved if you don't have an advisor that's helping to facilitate the transaction in general.
Absolutely. You also don't want to come across as too opportunistic, especially in a challenging time like this.
Yeah, there is. I'm not sure if it's still entirely justified, but there is an existing stigma against private equity, especially in smaller family-owned companies, and that is something to be very cognizant of if you're marketing yourself to that segment of the market.
Absolutely. Perfect. Let's take one more for you. I'll let you finish your water there. And this one actually goes more towards our processes right here. So the question is, how does SPS define each of the processes, limited, moderate, and broad? And I think kind of a follow-up to that would be really, how should that impact and how should people really be thinking about those when they look at that data?
Good question. The sell side process, a little bit of the secret sauce. So we using, just in terms of the methodology behind it, not even just the breakpoints, because in case some people aren't as familiar with it. So we're classifying all of the closed transactions in our database, which we have to research the entirety of. Our in-house research team does that. Never comes from client pipeline data. We know how many hits each closed deal in our database gets against a client pipeline. We're not even tracking who saw it or anything like that, just number of hits. Given that we're using about maybe 150 sponsor deal pipelines to calculate this, and we know how many sponsors are active in North America, where the fund or independent sponsor is based in US or Canada, and they've done at least one deal in the past couple of years. We're not counting anybody with a PO box and a website. So we see it as about a 10-to-1, roughly proportional proxy between our client base and the broader market. So the exact breakpoints can vary a little bit depending on the quarter and how many logs we have. So I'm not necessarily going to say those exactly here, but you can imagine that if it's just 0 or even just one SPS client that saw the deal, we're not going to market as broad. That's probably going to be a limited deal. If we have something where 10 or 20 SPS clients are seeing it, we're going to be marketing that as broad. Somewhere in the middle, that's where the moderate is. And the limited deals, by definition, are really hard to see. I don't know if for a larger fund or somebody that would typically do platforms north of 100 mil, I don't know how much they want to track down every single missed limited transaction. But missed moderate deals seem to be pretty compelling. It's kind of like that Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, not too cold. Those get a good amount of attention, especially on this year's Dober, depending on where your firm showed up on that line item. Slide 2 in the market coverage for sell side process. Pull a report from the portal, missed moderate deals over the last year, and qualify the list and start reaching out to those professionals. And then the broad deals, you still have to be involved in those, I think, depending on what part of the industry you're investing in. So it's certainly something that can't be discounted, and they would still count for the majority of closed deals the larger you get. If you're only looking at deals below 50 mil, it's pretty evenly broken up between limited, moderate, and broad, about a third. But the larger you get from that, the number of limited deals do tend to go down relative to the others.
Absolutely. I think one of the enhancements that you added to the Dober this year to help clients kind of, put that number into context, right, is the actual deal count for the limited, moderate, and broad breakdown. And so one of the things that's interesting is you look at the median percentage or the top quartile percentage, and you actually have the total universe right there. You can see that you could probably count those deals on one hand. In some of these cases, right? And so while the percentages themselves can be a little bit shocking at first, once you kind of just do the math real quick, you realize, okay, that's actually not that many opportunities, right, to actually move the needle in terms of coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a direct piece of client feedback. So anybody listening, as you're reviewing your reports, if you have, obviously we're having as many individual calls with clients as we can, but any thoughts, ideas, concerns, suggestions, we are always open to them. And what you are all receiving this year is really the result of many years of incorporating that kind of feedback while still, as much as we can, keeping the report focused on what happened to us, what happened to everyone else, where should we focus our time to change things, and then a year from now, just do it again. Just iterate.
Absolutely. It's about building that cadence and kind of a structure around the data to continue to move the needle kind of in a consistent fashion going forward. Excellent. Brendan, that's it for our questions that we have from the audience right now. So I think we could probably wrap this up. Really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through a little bit of the history and the methodology, to everyone today. To everyone who's on the line, we're happy to continue to take your questions. You can send them to me individually afterwards, or Brendan. Probably spoken to one of the two of us as your key contact here at SPS at some point in the recent past. That said, if you have any other feedback, right, in terms of what you'd like to see from the Dober itself, we are always, as Brendan just said, right, we are actively soliciting and incorporating feedback for what's relevant and what, frankly, can be done on our end in a statistical manner that's that's sound. And of course, for our next town hall, right, we'll be looking to do one probably in early December at this point. And so, kind of in between the holidays, hopefully not to be interruptive, but really additive to the processes. And so we'll be soliciting any kind of feedback on the process here, anything that we've done, frankly, any topics that you'd like to see. So really appreciate everyone's time. Brendan, thank you again. And everyone, I will be sending out a recording of this. So if you had to drop off or you can miss the early part, you can catch up at any moment. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. And again, Rich, thank you for putting this all together. Looking forward to the next one.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Take care.